this question as to what's the point of having an independent body to regulate and screen your actions if you diverge from their judgments whenever they don't suit you. I don't see there being a future for the Code of Conduct panel if the recommendation is not followed.
Welcome to the Bailiwick Express podcast. My name is Matthew Leach. I'll be joined each week by the editor of the Express, Aaron Carpenter, for a series of podcasts. Each will shine a light on topics from across the bailiwick. The format will change week to week. We'll have debates, reviews, hot seat interviews and plenty of guests. So stick with us as we offer some insight on the most important issues we in the bailiwick face. Internet trolling. It's not what you expect from a deputy when you vote them in, but unfortunately, this kind of behaviour has been making the headlines recently. Deputy Christopher Le Tissier was caught out using the Twitter handle @Radiosutch299 to anonymously criticise his colleagues, sometimes while sitting in the State's chamber himself. His actions have forced him to self-refer to a Code of Conduct panel, and he now faces the boot from the States. The story was initially broken following an investigation spearheaded by the editor of the Bailiwick Express, Aaron Carpenter. I spoke to him about the role of social media in this day and age, the investigation that could lead to a sitting deputy removed from his role, and why it's so important to hold our elected officials to a high standard. I thought it would be better to start potentially at the beginning of this whole saga and ask you, when you first started to hear rumours or ideas that there were deputies or a deputy with aliases on Twitter.
It was first brought to my attention late February. Before that, as I understand it, there were rumours, there was speculation on social media that this account, which did not flag up who it belonged to, Radiosutch299, known at the time as the Pirate, was actually Deputy Le Tissier. So having received those claims and had that put to me, I started investigating it, found out that the links that had been made did appear to have substance. So the first logical step was to put them to Deputy Le Tissier. So we had a fairly brief kind of 90-second chat on the phone. The replies were generally in the vein of no comment. And then, having not really received much information from him, confirmation or denial, since he didn't think it was something he wanted to comment on, questions were put to the Guernsey party. Of course, he was a full member at the time. He's since been suspended. And they also denied any knowledge of his social media activity, which at the time that I was alleging. So I looked into it further. There were clear links between that Twitter handle or that Twitter account and a YouTube page in which he was positively identified. Trawling back through some of the older videos, there were also shared content. A visit to a Canadian flight hangar, for example, in Canada some years ago, which also formed part of a previous cover picture for his Twitter page. So there were various things that kind of looked into, images that were kind of cross-matched from one account to the other, and given that he was positively identified in the YouTube account, and he's obviously never denied that the YouTube account was his, obviously the links appeared stronger, and we documented that, given that we had substantial, I think, reason to do so. After the publication of that detail, he came out with an admission that the account did belong to him, and the rest, as I say, is history. It's perhaps surprised me somewhat in what direction it has gone, but it's been fascinating in a way to think, is this part of a bigger issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, my question, I guess, from that to you, investigating this as you have been, which I'm sure was very interesting to you, you must have needed to be 100% when you first dropped the first story. When did that moment come when you knew, I'm right, or this is correct?
At that point, he was still denying it, and there was a second story lined up, already written, essentially, before the first one actually went live. So it was there, and I knew that the links were proven. It was then just a case of opening with what we had and then following it up with the detail that I guess, if you like, I was sitting on. Because with anything like this, you don't want to leave it to a leap of faith. This is someone's reputation at stake. And you don't want to make unproven claims. You don't want to make false claims. And as a news outlet, it would be irresponsible to even entertain that thought. There's a little bit of speculation at the moment about other accounts. I think it would be unwise for any media organisation to jump to conclusions about anyone else based on hearsay or comments along the lines of, well, I think they did it too. It's a rigorous process. It's not an overnight investigation. Unless you have proof or an admission, it's difficult to approach it.
And so what do you make of the fallout now? You mentioned leaves everything in an interesting place. I mean, how important do you think it was to scrutinise a politician in the way that has been done in this case?
I think there's a bigger issue in our society at the moment, and we encounter it probably on the front end of news, about social media and some of the interaction that you see, because I think there's an ongoing conversation in many areas. One of them is about how it can be used to troll other people and essentially undermine accountability. And accountability is essential to our whole system of representation in the States. We need to be able to hold our political leaders to account. We need to be able to hold the States of Guernsey as an organisation to account. And anything that denigrates that needs to be challenged, and it cannot be put in too hard to do pile, which I think perhaps has been done in the past. The other issue about a wider problem, we see it in other things as well. We know that court reporting, especially with live cases, it is something that is becoming increasingly problematic globally because people are prejudiced in cases by commenting on social media. So there are editorial decisions that you have to make from a news perspective about not wanting to inform people, but having to manage how you do it, because you know that potential is there. And it's not just potential anymore, it is happening. And we've seen some very high profile cases around the world that have been scuppered because they have been prejudiced. So the whole subject of trolling, the whole subject of social media comment is very much in the spotlight, and it's a conversation that we need to be open and frank about. So I think that's probably why the idea of someone not being open and frank about the comments that they're making, about criticising Guernsey's politicians while himself a politician and pretending not to be in particular, is I think it has been received so badly, and why it's so concerning.
Do you think it shows a certain level of ignorance of the platform that he was on? Do you think he understood what kind of ramifications could be left from his actions?
The Code of Conduct panel, who presided over this case, judged it to be foolish and naive. Now, without getting an answer from him, an honest answer either way, I wouldn't want to speculate on whether he knew what he was doing or whether he didn't. The outcome is the same, unfortunately. And it's the outcome that I think the panel focuses on when it recommends such a strong response to his actions.
I was going to ask you about that strong response, and I think that's worth discussing, because, I mean, what will happen to him now? Where are we at with Deputy Le Tissier, or potentially not Deputy Le Tissier?
Yeah, so the situation is unprecedented, and there's a lot of comment at the moment about whether or not it's justified. If we look at Deputy Le Tissier's response, his response to it was, "I'm surprised, shocked and disappointed at the severity of the panel's decision. I'm currently consulting with my advocates at what options are available for a challenge. I've also asked for all relevant records under a subject access request to enable me to understand why the panel has handed down such a disproportionate and draconian penalty. Now, of course, that statement was made earlier this week, but as far as I'm aware, there have been no further statements. That still stands. The decision is one of 5 open to the panel once they find someone guilty of breaching the code of conduct. The least severe of those options is a caution. Then it goes formal reprimand, suspension from the states, removal from a particular office. So, for example, he is a committee member of Home Affairs. His comments about non-locals, would in many people's eyes justify removal from that committee. And then the most severe is expulsion from the states. As I said, there is no precedent for the nature of his breaches. I can't think of a previous example where a trolling deputy has come into the spotlight of the code of conduct. So what that means is that there is no, I suppose to use kind of legal terms of reference, there's no case law, there's no reference point, there's no this was done in 2008 or this was done in 2016 and this is how it was managed at the time. So this is very important for a few reasons. One of them is that it will set a precedent, and if this is the standards that we hold one member accountable to, then the same has to be applied to
everybody else.
Anyone else who commits breaches of a similar nature or has committed breaches of a similar nature.
Were you surprised, or did you expect the decision that they made?
I think because it is unprecedented, it was hard to predict. There were numerous complaints, and there was a lot of public interest in this case. Whether it's proportionate will be something that the states will obviously have to rule on, and they will have the chance to do that.
So the states get to vote on this now?
Yeah, so it's not actually a binding decision, the decision of the panel. Essentially, the panel is set up as a regulator of sorts to scrutinise the actions and the behaviour of states' deputies. But of course, they're not bound to actually follow its recommendations, which is, of course, one of the problematic elements of this. But going back to what happens next, a report will be prepared, it will be presented to the states. As I'm hearing at the moment, that will be at the next meeting on the 28th of April. And then the states will decide whether or not to kind of confirm that direction of travel, whether or not he should be expelled from the states. I'm hearing that an alternative report will be drafted, offering the states different options, essentially all of the other punishments in descending order. The indication is that Deputy Tissier, is challenging the move, and any deputy who challenges a decision or appeals against a decision will then have that decision heard by the States Assembly. And by the way, there is that right, that provision within the law. A member has a right to appeal the panel's decision on 2 grounds. Significant factual inaccuracy, which, if correct, would or could have led to a different outcome, or procedural errors. So I'm not sure which one he's claiming, but those are the grounds for it. But prior to that, there should be a determination as to whether his appeal has any grounds. But regardless, this is heading to the states, and it's going to be a political decision.
And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know how anybody sees it, but you can't talk about Deputy Le Tissier within this story without talking about the Guernsey party. So
yes.
What does that leave his position with the Guernsey party, and what have we heard from them? And I guess, what does it mean for the party and party politics in general, if somebody can shine this kind of light on their own party?
Well, party politics in Guernsey is still an emerging beast. We don't really know that much about how it works in practice when it falls into conflict. So, we don't have probably the correct system of government for party politics. It's a consensus form of government, which makes it inherently problematic for there to be party politics. That being said, it's a very interesting development, and I'm fascinated to see how it develops. But what that means in practice is there can be certain quirks which make this difficult. So, for example, the Rules Committee, the Rules of Procedure Committee, SAC, has a Guernsey Party member. So what's he going to be doing when his committee is asked to vote on the proposal I'm hearing about for alternative sanctions? Will he abstain? Is there a conflict that needs to be declared as a kind of party colleague?
Is this the kind of training wheel stage of party politics where these kind of issues get flushed out?
I think it is. It's in practice, because there are members of different parties or different political associations, depending on how they decide to brand themselves, that populate almost every committee of the states. So it'd be interesting just to see if all the Guernsey Party members stand up in the states debate and just make that absolutely clear to anyone listening from home, genuinely listening from home, not a deputy, who won't know just from name recognition that they are a party colleague. Of course, he's suspended at the moment, but that's a very muddy water, because it seems a very interesting definition of suspension, because...
What is he suspended from doing?
That's part of it. He's suspended from everything. I think they've taken him off of their website, but if you suspend a footballer for bad conduct, as a former deputy said on Twitter earlier today, he doesn't immediately leave your squad. There are players who've been suspended for COVID breaches. They're still a member of that organisation. It'd be fascinating to see how they vote on this when it goes to the States, or whether there will be a party line. Will all Guernsey Party members be advised to abstain from the vote, or to vote a certain way? Because so far, the party's own view of this has been unclear, and I think it's been reactive rather than proactive.
Have they ever released a statement? They released a statement about him being removed from the party.
Yes, and that has been used as justification for not commenting further following the publication of the panel's report earlier this week. Obviously, we do also know that the report itself apparently was not supposed to be published, which still waiting to see what comes from that development, because may it be a procedural error that prejudices the way that it's been handled. I'm not sure about that, but it's an interesting thing to happen. It's an interesting mistake. And one would hope that a mistake does not have any repercussions on the outcome either way.
And what kind of response has there been from other deputies, from his colleagues, his co-workers, his peers?
I think there's a strong group who will almost certainly vote in favour of the recommendation of the panel. Part of that is because of his actions. Part of that is the duplicity involved with tweeting whilst pretending not to be an elected member. And part of that also is this question as to what's the point of having an independent body to regulate and screen your actions if you diverge from their judgments whenever they don't suit you. I don't see there being a future for the Code of Conduct panel if the recommendation is not followed. But it's hard to imagine a future for a panel that, having made its first really serious recommendation, is voted against.
Has it made recommendations in the past?
Nothing of this nature. I certainly can't think of anything where a punishment this severe has been pushed by the panel. And we have seen, in fairness, we have seen some questionable activity. Obviously, there was a very well publicised comment from former Deputy Bernard Fluke about a racial term which did go to the States for debate, but obviously was not given such a sanction from this panel. There was Deputy Mike Hadley from HSSD, I think back in 2013, who was sanctioned, but again not to this extent, for leaking committee documents. A punishment like this would be unprecedented. It would set a new benchmark for what we expect from states' behaviour, but also it's a different kind of breach. So there is a question as to should we be how does this fit into the history of Code of Conduct complaints? Is this a new chapter? Is this dealing with a new issue? And the only real benchmark for it will be this. This will be the benchmark. If approved, if it stands up in the States, then this will be a standard that you can't really diverge from, and not, at least not in the immediate future. Because once you've said this, I don't think there's any turning back.
You can't ignore it then, I suppose.
No, and if there is the case, we know that there will be automatically a by-election will be triggered. In which case, I'd suggest maybe holding off on organising that straight away, because if you don't want to organise 3 by-elections in 6 months.
I was going to ask, that's the potential next? Is it a by-election?
Yeah.
How does that work? And is it an island-wide by-election now? What goes on?
Yeah, so it's mandated by law, the law that kind of presaged the introduction of island-wide elections. So there's no way of diverging from that. So a lot of people on social media saying, well, Fergus Dunlop finished 39th. Should we just offer him the job? And then if he doesn't accept it, should we offer it to Pierre Amon, who finished 40th? Until we get someone accepting the position. That is not a way that they can go under the law. And whilst they could change the law to allow for a variation, that would not affect the current states. That could only come into force post 2025. So yes, if any member is sacked for any reason, or if any member has to leave the States for another reason, we saw the tragic death of Deputy Anne Cotterwasher last year, then there would be an automatic by-election. And it would be island-wide. There would be election expenses. There would be all of the exposure, the combined manifestos, etc., that there was for the full island-wide election. So a massive undertaking with an interesting difference in that people will get to campaign on the basis of how the current government is performing.
That is very interesting. They get given a bunch more, a whole raft more information to work with this time, to campaign for themselves.
Yeah, and if you're a candidate and you don't like what's happening, or you want to support what's happening, you can make that abundantly clear. And given that there are parties in place, there's going to be an interesting crossover, I think, between the current political members and those who are looking to stand under a particular banner.
I can't wait. I know next, I guess I just wanted to finish off by saying, you mentioned before, and I think I agree, we're in a different social environment at the moment. It seems to be a higher threshold for how people should act, and people seem to be scrutinising people in power a hell of a lot more. Will this happen again? And was it ever a surprise that this happened in the first place?
No, I don't think this is a one-off by any means. And I think it's perhaps, in darkness these things grow. And the longer that people are able to carry out social media activity, to kind of covertly respond to things that are happening to states, to incite debate from a biased viewpoint without declaring who you are. When you've been able to do that for so long without any accountability or without anyone really shining a light on it, it would not surprise me if it was, if not endemic, then at least significantly more widespread than one first-time deputy. I think he is perhaps not the norm, but I don't think he is the exception in trying to push debate in a certain direction or to influence social media comment without putting his name to his comments.
It's a fair final point to make.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you for listening to the Bailiwick Express podcast. The title track was Shift My Weight by Luno. If you enjoyed it, I know it's a pain, but please like and share. It all helps, and remember, you can hit bailiwickexpress.com to stay right up to date with whatever is happening in the Bailiwick. You can find us online, on social, on email, and on internet radio. There'll be more from me, Matthew Leach, and all the Bailiwick Express team next Friday.